At long last, Blizzard has finally shared with us their plans for patch 11.2, The Ghosts of Koresh. That's right, in a total surprise to no one, well, almost no one, we're headed on a journey to the ethereal home planet. This plotline was hinted at the end of the 11.1 story cinematic, as we saw the Shadowguard Ethereal standing with the Darkheart staring at the Void of Koresh. Why are we going back to a ruined planet? Well, evil forces are trying to resurrect Dementius. If they're able to do that, their next stop is to swing by and destroy Azeroth. If you're not familiar with Dementius, the Ethereals, or their home planet of Koresh, we first met them back in the Burning Crusade through a small quest chain centered around helping the Ethereals get revenge on Dementius, who had destroyed their homeworld by trying to consume its world soul, corrupting it with void energy. Thanks to lore walking, introduced in 11.1.7, we know that Koresh is not just the home planet of the Ethereals, but also the brokers. So they'll be showing up in 11.2 as well. Good news, everybody! We're all getting legendaries, this time called Reshiwraps. 11.2 brings with it a brand new legendary in the form of a cloak. Again, we've had legendary cloaks before, back in Ny'alotha and in Mists of Pandaria, and we're getting another one here, complete with the typical legendary cloak progression transmogs. Blizzard has hinted that a powerful person from the storyline will help us create and develop our Reshiwraps. I suspect this is probably Locust Walker, but maybe it could be Illyria, or it could be somebody else completely. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments below. The Reshiwraps are going to give us the ability to do a new in-game mechanic called phase diving, which will allow us to shift ourselves into untethered space and see the world the way the Ethereals do. Phase diving will be used in not just the overworld, but also the new raid, the new dungeon, and the new delves. Another key system in the 11.2 overworld is Ecological Succession, which Blizzard describes as an ethereal Jurassic Park. Hopefully it ends better for us than it does for most of the people in those movies. If you're familiar with Netherstorm, you'll remember the ethereal ecodomes that dot the inhospitable landscape out there. These same things exist on Koresh, but we're going to be helping repopulate them with various different species of animals from all across Azeroth. Before we dive into the meat of the announcement, let's touch briefly on tier sets. Now, Blizzard have not been too terribly specific just yet, but they describe tier sets as targeting hero talents. My biggest immediate concern is the level of tuning required to balance the two different sets of abilities per spec, in addition to balancing 30-some specs. All right, now let's dive into the real meat of the announcement of the Season 3 Mythic Plus Dungeon Pool. A newly revealed feature that we are very excited about is the implementation of Waystones. For a long time, people have asked for more respawn locations, or a better way to tell where the graveyard is, especially in the War Within. Waystones seem to be an answer to these issues. Once a Waystone is activated, you'll see it not only on the map, but you'll actually see its physical model in the dungeon. This is nice because it removes that constant wonder about whether releasing puts you at the last boss you just killed or all the way back at the front of the dungeon. The Waystone concept is really nice, and it also opens up some interesting implications for dungeon pathing if any of these Waystones are tied to lieutenant mobs instead of just bosses. The player base has traditionally asked for checkpoint updates after every boss. With Waystones, though, comes the possibility of some routing changes or difficulties. Consider, if you will, a Waystone tied to bubbles, for example. Now suddenly, a mob that gets skipped most of the time may become something you pull, even if historically groups prefer to skip these high health dangerous mobs in dungeons. We clearly don't know all the ins and outs yet, but it's certainly going to be nice at the very least to have a visual indicator of the closest graveyard, both on the map and physically in-game. Let's talk about the dungeon pool. You may remember that in 11.1, players voted for our favorite War Within dungeons. Blizzard mentioned that they would be updating the War Within dungeon selections with new visuals, new cast timers, and some additional changes in response to player concerns. Our 4 returning War Within dungeons, as decided by you, the player base, will be Ara Kara, Dawnbreaker, Operation Floodgate, and Priory of the Sacred Flame. Joining those 4, we see some familiar dungeons from Shadowlands, Halls of Atonement, and both Wings of Tazavesh. And of course, we have the brand new dungeon, Ecodome Aldani. Obviously, we don't know very much about this newcomer other than the name. It's a 3-boss dungeon, which is great. Who doesn't love a short dungeon? We also know that phase diving will be utilized here, though we're unsure whether this mechanic will be a mandatory part of the dungeon or an optional bonus. Ecodome Aldani will be available in normal, heroic, and Mythic 0 at launch, which is exciting, and it jumps right into the Mythic Plus pool when the season opens up. The other interesting thing to mention about Ecodome Aldani before we move on is that traditionally the story of a patch would progress through the quest campaign, then the relevant dungeon, and finally the raid for the story's big conclusion. But in Ghosts of Koresh, the storyline takes us from the raid to the dungeon instead. So we're pretty sure that the third boss in Ecodome Eldani is going to have big lore implications, and we're pretty excited to see what those might be. Returning from Shadowlands is our old friend, the Halls of Atonement. This dungeon was a crowd favorite throughout the expansion due to the Venthyr theme and the Reverend Dreth aesthetic. Halls also had a nice short timer and challenging bosses that felt both fair and fun. I'm curious to see how this dungeon feels though without Ashen Hollow, which did a lot of heavy lifting for groups back in Shadowlands. Let's pour one out for our boy Ashen Hollow. In 2022, RaiderIO ran a dungeon popularity competition to determine the player's favorite Mythic Plus dungeons of all time. Halls of Atonement won its round by a landslide, and the data that we have supports that community sentiment. Halls was consistently the second most popular Keystone run throughout all 3 seasons of Shadowlands, and as far as difficulty goes, it was generally in the middle of the pack. I'm excited to see Halls of Atonement come back, and I can't wait to see what the new routes the community cooks up without the Venthyr tricks to help us through. Next up, we have Tazavesh, Streets of Wonder. Unlike Halls of Atonement, community sentiment around Streets of Wonder was a little less positive and seemed to point more towards a general sense of dread whenever this keystone popped up. Tazavesh was initially launched as a mega dungeon in Shadowlands Season 2, and then Streets of Wonder first joined the Mythic Plus pool in Season 3, remaining there in Season 4. Streets was one of the most timed dungeons in Season 4, and with such a high success rate, a gorgeous map, and fun enemy models, it's strange that Streets wasn't more popular, but it is a 5-boss dungeon from a time when Tyrannical and Fortified existed in a very different state from today, and it also includes a gimmicky, often broken boss in the musical bar fight, which probably dampened player opinions, as many tend to like faster dungeons that are more straightforward. Personally, I enjoyed Streets of Wonder and remember it fondly, even back to our first 4-hour venture through a plus 14 in the first week of Season 3. The menagerie still gives me nightmares. Next is Solea's Gambit. In contrast to Streets, Solea's Gambit was considered to be a fun time. Right at the beginning, you're met with a vast open field chock full of murlocs, and we would see groups pulling together massive pulls in that area. Also, it's got the ever popular "Our Captain is a Dragon" audio cue, which is probably one of the most iconic dungeon cues now. We're actually finally able to get that pirate dragon as a mount in 11.1.7 during the turbulent timeways, so make sure you're doing your time walking over the next few weeks. In Shadowlands Season 4, Gambit was the second most run dungeon, but it was just above the middle of the pack in terms of difficulty. It was run a lot, but it wasn't always timed. I can't wait to dive back into that field of murlocs next season. Next up, returning from War Within Season 1, we have Ara Kara, City of Echoes, and the Dawnbreaker. I'm pretty sure Ara Kara was voted back in purely due to the fact that people want Sackbrood, and they've convinced themselves that it will not be changed going into Season 3. I will be extremely surprised if it isn't altered in some way. Ara Kara is another one of those dungeons that is a short 3-boss dungeon with an easy timer, but it has a last boss that is extremely punishing on pugs. That being said, Ara Kara comes in as the second most run dungeon of Season 1 with the 3rd highest completion rate in time. All of that despite the wave dodging, dispel spamming casserole of nonsense that is the last boss. Dawnbreaker also comes back to us from Season 1 as the 5th most run and most timed dungeon in that season. The biggest issue with Dawnbreaker for most people was that the ships, even late into the season, were still extremely buggy with many mechanics and flying in general. You would often see ground-based abilities that were placed on the deck of the ship just fly behind the ship and disappear into the ether. Sometimes the ships wouldn't appear at all, and occasionally you'd fall right through them instead. Next up, we have a very familiar face, fresh from this season, Operation Floodgate. Almost everyone felt that this was a great dungeon when it was unveiled, and I think that still holds true up to a certain point. Operation Floodgate has this weird difficulty curve in that it's generally a fine dungeon up until you hit a certain key level, and then it's just all of the most punishing mechanics you could possibly think of, all piled together in one dungeon. But Floodgate is the 4th most run dungeon this season and 5th on the list for in-time completion. So it's right there in the middle. The difficulty matches roughly where it is for popularity. Seeing Floodgate come back is great. It's got a great trinket in the improved Sephorian Pacemaker, which, much like the Sackbrood, I expect we'll see some tuning going into next season. But it is a fun dungeon, and luckily people will be quite familiar with it heading into Season 3. Last, but not least, we have the Priory of the Sacred Flame. Priory is the 2nd most run dungeon this season. It is a very popular dungeon, and it's in the top half for in-time completion with only a 2% difference between it and 2nd place. And unsurprisingly, Priory has good trinkets in the Signet of the Priory and the Tome of Light's Devotion. I'm seeing a bit of a trend here in the player's favorite dungeons, 3 with strong trinket options, and then Dawnbreaker as the odd man out. One thing I am curious about, Blizzard has said in interviews that when choosing returning dungeons for the Mythic Plus pool, they tend to make their choices for thematic reasons. Obviously, Tazavesh was chosen because it's the hub city in 11.2 and we'll be seeing the brokers again. But this doesn't explain why Halls of Atonement was chosen. The two reasons that Morgan Day gave in an interview for why they typically add dungeons to a pool are either A, for lore implications, or B, because they balance out the gameplay of the others in the pool. I don't think there's lore implications for Halls of Atonement, so maybe it is a style choice. Either way, I'm happy Halls will be returning for Season 3. Blizzard also gave us a sneak peek at the upcoming raid, which is called Manaforge Omega. We already know 4 of the 8 bosses in the raid, one of which is a mysterious council of demon hunters. They're probably looking for trouble. We'll also face the creature who creates the ethereal silk wrappings. It looks almost like a giant furry spider. Of course, in true Blizzard fashion, the first boss that we fight is a sewer guard, because naturally, we'll be using the Reshi Wraps to sneak in through the sewers, taking down the guard with aspects of phase diving on our way into the Manaforge. Then Blizzard hit us with the end boss, Dimensius. Once just an overgrown blueberry, the Dimensius we'll face in Season 3 is described as a cosmic level battle. We're told he's going to be roughly the size of Stormwind. This is clearly going to be an epic and intense fight, so we took a look back at the last boss total pulls from raids all the way back to when the Race to World First really started heating up. End boss pulls starting then from that range go from 100 pulls on the low end with Gallywix this tier to 404 pulls, which we saw with Ansarek. There's a huge range of pull counts in between. Looking at the pull counts though, I wouldn't describe any of these bosses as cosmic level. It's fun to try and guess where we think Dimensius will land for the fight difficulty and pull count, now that we're expecting he is a boss on a scale Blizzard have never attempted before. In the last of our 11.2 PvE news, we also have a new delve coming. It's the Azure Vaults, but now with 100% more ethereals. Bran is the seasonal companion again, of course, but our seasonal nemesis is Nexus Princess Kaiveza. And they said this time she's not holding back, and I don't know what that means. I didn't feel like she was holding back the first time we fought her. I definitely do not think she took it easy on us. One of the delve features Blizzard mentioned is a social function much like those you'd find in Demon Souls or Dark Souls. You'll be able to see phased versions of your friends, including where they died, and your friends will be able to leave messages for you. Last but not least, for you PvPers out there, Blizzard have made you your very own Gank Island. It's a world PvP playground specifically designed for players who like to go and ruin each other's day. It's not for me, and I definitely won't be spending any time there, but if you enjoy sneaking up on somebody just trying to pick flowers, you'll have a real good time on Vanquisher's Wake Island. Make sure to like and subscribe because we'll have a lot more 11.2 content in the coming weeks as we dive into the PTR and get our hands on dungeon and raid testing. We're looking forward to sharing the journey with you as we head into Ghosts of Koresh. What did you think? Are you excited? Are you bummed out that we're not going to the Root Lands? Let us know in the comments below. And until next time, I've been Sean, and I'll see you right back here at RaiderIO.